At the very core of our being, in the hidden depths of the psyche, an invisible lever lies dormant. And sometimes, when the external invades our space, when something alien, unfamiliar, or unaccustomed touches our boundaries, this lever activates without our knowledge, unleashing an uncontrolled impulse. This is not merely disagreement, not slight irritation. It is a deep rejection, an almost physical revulsion that permeates every cell of consciousness. It is a reaction that instantly throws us off balance, causing us to instinctively shrink, recoil, and at times even attack. It is here on the invisible boundary between self and non-self, between our world and everything perceived as other, that what I call the pole of irritation arises. It manifests not only in an individual's reaction to a noisy neighbor or an uncomfortable truth. Its true power is revealed in the collective unconscious, where it materializes as xenophobia, an unexplained, irrational hatred of other cultures, peoples, and beliefs. It pulsates in aggression directed at those who are not like us, in that deep, sometimes unconscious aversion that permeates entire nations, fueling the fires of conflicts and wars. This is not just an emotion, it is a reaction, ancient, primal, and therefore so dangerous. Imagine that this irritation is not just an external trigger, but an internal tuning fork. It resonates with something long forgotten, repressed, something that was once rejected and locked away in the dark corners of our own psyche. It is like a shard of a mirror suddenly reflecting not external reality, but a shadow within yourself. The rejection of the other, the alien, the different, is often and frightening often the rejection of a part of oneself that one once had to abandon, that one had to banish from one's own inner world. But what if behind this burning, destructive irritation, behind this seemingly destructive force, something else is hidden, something powerful, something that, when recognized, can become a source of transformation, not destruction. This primal reaction, this instinctive recoil, it is not merely a weakness or a flaw. It is a signal, a powerful vibrating signal pointing to something fundamental that demands our attention, our courage to look deeper. It is not just a symptom of illness. It is a key to healing if we dare to pick it up. And so we stand before this scandalous mirror, which relentlessly shows us not only the face of collective hatred, genocide, and senseless violence, but also the deep, invisible cracks in the foundation of our own self. It demonstrates how external aggression towards others is merely an echo of an internal drama that unfolded long ago. Why does it happen that entire nations, entire cultures, as if by the command of an invisible conductor, begin to reject, demonize, and destroy what so clearly reflects their own repressed side? What internal exile was so cruelly rejected that its shadow gained such destructive power in the collective unconscious, forcing us to repeat the same tragic scenarios? Imagine an ancient forest of consciousness where every manifestation of life, every instinct, every facet of human nature has its rightful place. But at some point at the dawn of civilization, and then in every new turn of social development, humanity, and subsequently the forming society began to pass judgment. Not merely an assessment, but a verdict. This was not a sudden, conscious act. Rather, it was a slow, sometimes unconscious process during which certain vital aspects of human nature, those very aspects that could ensure healthy self-realization and integrity, were gradually exiled to the periphery of collective perception. Recall how the personal shadow was formed. What was inconvenient, ugly, unacceptable to parents, teachers, or significant adults was repressed from the child's consciousness, becoming their internal exile. This same mechanism, but on a colossal scale, also operated at the societal level, giving rise to its own vast, invisible, collective shadow. Once in primitive communities, healthy aggression was not just permissible, but necessary for survival. To protect the tribe, to hunt for food, it was a pure, uncorrupted energy of action, the energy of the will to live. But with the advent of more complex social structures, with the emergence of hierarchies, norms, and laws, this energy began to be perceived differently. It became bad, destructive, uncivilized, if it manifested outside strictly established frameworks. The ability to compete, a driving force of progress, suddenly became synonymous with greed or cruelty, the right to err, without which development and learning are inconceivable, became a mark of shame, a sign of weakness or incompetence. Vulnerability, the natural human openness to the world and to one another, turned into a dangerous breach that needed to be hidden to avoid being rejected, exploited, or destroyed. Society, like an individual, strived for an ideal, for a bright image of itself, for a perfection that in essence does not exist in reality, and everything that did not fit into this one-sided, sterile image, be it the primal power of instincts, the chaos of creative beginnings, the unpredictability of emotions, or even simply the imperfection of human nature, was declared taboo. These aspects, vital for the fullness of being, for genuine humanity, were not destroyed. No, they were merely driven underground into the dark corners of the collective unconscious, where they continued to live, but in a distorted, deformed state. They became that very collective shadow which, like a dormant volcano, merely awaits the moment to erupt the accumulated tension, to break through the thin crust of civilization. Thus, invisible prisons were formed for those qualities that were rejected, being strong but not aggressive, being successful but not ambitious, being open but not vulnerable, being creative but not chaotic. These paradoxical and sometimes impossible demands created deep internal conflicts at the level of individuals and entire nations. These conflicts then inevitably projected outwards. What society could not accept in itself, it began to see in the other, in a foreign tribe, nation, culture, in dissidents, or simply those who were different. And this other became the bearer of all repressed, rejected qualities. They became dangerous, uncivilized, the enemy, because in them, as in a scandalous mirror, was reflected what society so desperately tried to escape in itself, what it had once banished from its inner world. This historical amnesia, this forgetting of one's own integrity, led to entire aspects of human experience being outlawed. And the deeper these aspects were driven into the collective unconscious, the more distorted and destructive they became when they did break through. Wars, genocide, xenophobia, inhumane ideologies. These are not merely conflicts of interest or economic disputes. They are the cry of a cornered, rejected part of the human soul, of the collective psyche, which seeks an outlet, even if through destruction, through monstrous manifestations of evil. This process, rooted in the depths of our history, is woven into the fabric of cultural narratives, myths, and laws, defining who we are and who they are. And this division, this externalization of internal qualities, has its universal principles, its archetypal manifestations, which we can observe in ancient tales and in the sharpest conflicts of modernity, appearing as a kind of unpaid bill awaiting its reckoning. We have spoken of the pole of irritation, that deep, almost instinctive reaction of rejecting everything foreign, unfamiliar, and how this reaction often conceals the projection of repressed aspects of our own psyche, our own self, or of the collective unconscious, that very shadow. And if at an individual level this can manifest as an inexplicable antipathy towards a certain type of person or character trait, then at the collective level, on the scale of nations and cultures, it becomes something far more sinister. Imagine an ancient tribe. To preserve the purity of its image, its identity, it had to define what was foreign, what was dangerous, what was not like us. And everything that did not fit into this ideal, often sanitized image was banished, not just physically, but symbolically. Not only people were exiled, but also qualities, rudeness, untamed passion, aggression, vulnerability, greed, doubt. Everything that could destroy fragile harmony or an idealized self-image. This is the archetypal exile from the tribe, where the collective, like an individual, tries to cut off and discard those parts of itself that seem unacceptable, shameful, or threatening. And these exiled aspects do not disappear. They do not vanish into thin air. They settle in the collective unconscious, becoming a dark, uncontrollable mass of energy, that very collective shadow. And here another, no less powerful principle comes into play, the energy of the unpaid bill. Imagine that for years you avoid paying your bills, stacking them in a distant drawer. The debt grows, interest accumulates, and at some point this accumulated energy demands an outlet. Repressed qualities, unrecognized, unintegrated, unlived, accumulate immense tension. This energy cannot simply disappear. It seeks an outlet. It seeks its bearer, its object for projection. And when the inner world, be it individual or collective, is overflowing with this unpaid debt, it begins to seek an external scapegoat, someone who will bear the burden of everything rejected, everything unpleasant, everything we do not want to see in ourselves. Human history is full of such examples. Recall ancient rituals where the sins of an entire community were symbolically placed on an animal or even a person who was then banished or sacrificed. This was literally a scapegoat, a pharmakos in ancient Greek tradition. This mechanism, described by anthropologist René Girard, shows how society, to avoid internal disintegration and self-destruction, redirects its aggression and its unacceptable aspects onto an external enemy, onto the other. This other becomes a mirror in which we see not their true face, but only a reflection of our own exiled shadow. We hate in them what we once banished from ourselves. We project onto them our own fears, our own aggression, our own sense of inferiority. It is precisely this mechanism, this energy of the unpaid bill, this projection of qualities exiled from the tribe, that leads to the horrifying phenomena we speak of, to wars where the enemy is dehumanized, stripped of humanity, because in them we see a monster, not our own reflection, to genocide where entire peoples are destroyed for having become the bearer of the collective shadow, shadow, to xenophobia, where any difference is perceived as a threat because it is a reminder of our own unintegrated shadow. It is no surprise that during periods of deep social crisis and instability, when the collective psyche is most vulnerable, these projections become especially strong and destructive. But who ultimately becomes this scapegoat in the modern world? What images, what types of people or communities most often cause this irrational rejection, becoming receptacles for our collective shadow? The collective shadow is not formless. It takes on faces, embodying itself in archetypes that become its living carriers, its instruments. Look closely at them, for in their distorted features, we will see a reflection of what society has banished from itself. One such archetype is the architect of purity. This is not necessarily someone who shouts from podiums, but one who is obsessed with the idea of impeccability, sterility. In their inner world, there is no place for chaos, imperfection, dirt. They do not merely strive for order, they crave purification, the surgical removal of any element that, in their opinion, contaminates the ideal picture. The architect of purity is a vessel for the collective fear of its own disintegration, of the natural entropy of life. They see indifference is not richness, but a threat of contamination, in dissent and full abscess that must be excised. Their righteous anger is merely an echo of suppressed terror at their own vulnerability, at the recognition that in themselves and in their ideal world there are cracks. It is from this obsession that ideas of unclean races, infected ideologies, and the need for sanitary zones and purges are born. Alongside them, or even within them, often resides the mirror breaker. This archetype acts not through fire, but through cold, methodical distortion. Their task is to break the mirror of our shared humanity, to strip the other of face, name, and history. They transform a complex, multifaceted personality into a one-dimensional caricature, into an abstract threat, into a depersonalized them. The mirror breaker is the embodiment of the collective unwillingness to see itself in the foreign. It is suppressed empathy turned inside out. They create monsters out of ordinary people, denying them the right to pain, to joy, to error, to dignity. In their hands, words become scalpels, dismembering the image of a person, and images become poisonous ink, drawing monstrous portraits. This is how conditions for genocide are created, for it is psychologically easier to destroy an idea or a parasite than a living person. Who becomes the target of these archetypes? Who causes that irrational hatred and irritation we spoke of? It is those who unwittingly, by their very existence, expose the repressed aspects of the collective shadow. This can be the stranger whose culture, language, or appearance differs too starkly, reminding us of suppressed multidimensionality and distinctiveness. It can be the weak who cause revulsion because they reflect society's own rejected vulnerability. It can be the successful who provoke envy, for they demonstrate unrealized potential. Or the dissenter whose disagreement is an echo of a suppressed inner voice crying out for freedom. These people become that very scandalous mirror in which society sees not them, but its own rejected and hated shadow. Let me tell you about Maria. She was an ordinary HR employee at a large company, meticulous and diligent. At first, she was irritated by tardiness, then by the informal dress code of some colleagues, then by their accents. Gradually, this irritation turned into cold contempt for those she considered not professional enough or not conforming to corporate culture. She began to compile dossiers noting the slightest missteps, unspoken remarks, even intonations. Her reports, seemingly objective, were permeated with quiet condemnation, creating an invisible field of rejection around certain employees. She did not shout, did not make scenes, but her gaze, her subtle hints, her correct questions at meetings methodically purged from the collective those who did not fit into her idea of a clean and efficient office. Maria, unknowingly, became an architect of purity and a mirror breaker, projecting her own unspoken need for control and fear of chaos onto her colleagues. Her actions, seemingly minor, created an atmosphere of intolerance, sowing the seeds for more widespread processes of rejection. However, at the very heart of these demons, in their distorted power, something fundamental and potentially constructive is hidden. We have gazed into the abyss of collective rejection, into those shadowy corners where society, like an individual, banishes everything inconvenient, alien, frightening. We have seen how this repressed energy breaks through in the form of xenophobia, conflicts, and genocide, dehumanizing the other and transforming them into a projection of our own rejected qualities. But what if within every shadow, every exiled demon lies not a curse, but a hidden blessing? What if what we so vehemently reject is, in fact, a distorted, unrecognized form of a vital force? Consider the aspects that have been exiled into the collective shadow. Aggression, for example, in its pure, uncorrupted form, it is nothing less than powerful life energy, the will to act, the ability to assert one's boundaries and protect what is dear. It is the courage needed to overcome obstacles, to transform the world, to create something new. When society labels any manifestation of aggression as evil, it does not merely suppress violence, it amputates its right to healthy assertiveness, to boldness in upholding truth, to determination in achieving goals. We forbid ourselves to be strong, to be warriors for justice, to be pioneers capable of breaking through walls of inertia. We deny ourselves the right to healthy competition, to daring, to that inner spark that ignites progress. And then this unintegrated force turns into passive aggression, hidden resistance, or cynicism, or else erupts in the most hideous, destructive forms that we so desperately tried to avoid. Or take vulnerability, that very fragility that society often despises as weakness, striving to create an image of an invulnerable, dispassionate hero. But within this seeming weakness lies the true strength of the human spirit, the capacity for empathy, for deep connection, for compassion. It is openness to the world, a willingness to receive and offer help, an acknowledgement of one's full humanity. When we exile vulnerability into the shadow, we forbid ourselves to be authentic, to be open, to be loving. We erect invisible walls around ourselves, dooming ourselves to loneliness and emotional rigidity. We deny ourselves the right to intimacy, to sincerity, to that tender but unbreakable bond that weaves human destinies together. We lose the ability to heal, for the recognition of pain is the first step to overcoming it. And what about chaos, disorder? Society craves order, structure, predictability, and this is natural, but the total rejection of chaos, the fear of any deviation from the norm of unpredictability, this is a refusal of an inexhaustible source of creativity and renewal. Chaos is fertile ground from which new things are born. It is the flexibility that allows adaptation to changing conditions. It is the spontaneity capable of breaking the chains of dogma. By exiling chaos, we deny ourselves the right to experiment, to innovate, to nonlinear development. We deprive ourselves of the opportunity to step outside the familiar, to break the vicious cycle of stagnation. We condemn ourselves to stagnation, to repeating the same mistakes, to an inability to see new paths when the old ones lead nowhere. Those whom we call architects of purity, striving for sterile impeccability and exiling differences, are in fact denying themselves the capacity to embrace diversity, to celebrate the uniqueness of each element of the whole. They forbid themselves the right to organic development, to the living, pulsating complexity of the world, which is always richer than any artificially created scheme. And the mirror breakers, dehumanizing the other so as not to see in them a reflection of their own rejected qualities, are in fact denying themselves the right to true self-knowledge, to deep empathy, to genuine reunification. They forbid themselves the right to acknowledge shared humanity, to reconciliation with their own shadow reflected in the eyes of the stranger. This amputation of one's own potential, this self-prohibition, does not pass without consequence. It distorts our reality, our interactions, our future, creating invisible barriers and fueling hidden conflicts that will inevitably manifest one day. What happens when this energy, this unpaid bill, finally demands its due? When society, like an individual, amputates a part of itself, striving for an ideal, it does not get rid of that part. It merely sends it into exile, into the dark corners of the collective unconscious, where it gathers strength, becoming the monster we so fear. It is there in this collective shadow that not only our common fears are hidden, but also the roots of the deepest social wounds. Recall the 20th century, a century obsessed with ideas of purity, racial, class, ideological. Nations gripped by the architect of purity archetype tried to burn out of their body everything that did not fit into their sterile image. Jews in Nazi Germany became the embodiment of filth, parasites, subversive elements, everything that German society refused to see in itself, its own greed, aggression, internal strife. The result? The Holocaust, not just an act of cruelty, but a monstrous manifestation of the collective shadow projected onto the other, brought to its logical, terrifying end. The fear of being unclean, of being inferior, resulted in an attempt to destroy impurity outside. Or take the history of colonialism. European powers, proclaiming themselves civilized, rational, bearers of light, projected onto the indigenous peoples of Africa, Asia, and America their own savagery, greed, and ruthlessness. Savages, underdeveloped, these labels justified the plunder of resources, enslavement, and violence. The unaccepted shadow of its own barbarism, hidden under the guise of a civilizing mission, led to centuries of oppression and still echoes with pain in global relations. Even in everyday conflicts between groups, be they political parties, social classes, or fan movements, we see the same mechanism. Each side seeks to displace its shortcomings, its unsavory motives, projecting them onto the opponent. They are deceitful, they are aggressive, they want to destroy. This refusal to acknowledge one's own shadow side makes dialogue impossible and conflict inevitable. But how does this concern you personally? How does your own fear of being like those demons whom you so fiercely condemn in others compel you to make disadvantageous decisions in the context of collective interaction? When you see in another person or in an entire group traits that you suppress within yourself, be it aggression, weakness, or even a certain chaotic freedom, your internal defense mechanism kicks in. You fear that if you acknowledge these traits in yourself, you will become like them. And then you begin either to actively fight them externally or conversely to passively submit to collective pressure, just to avoid being an outcast, not to be on the side of the demons. This fear paralyzes you when you need to speak out against injustice, when you need to defend someone whom the collective has declared an enemy. You are afraid that by showing empathy or understanding towards the outcast, you yourself will be infected by their demonic nature. The irony is that precisely this disadvantageous decision, abandoning your inner truth for external safety, makes you part of the very collective dynamic that generates suffering. Someone might object, but real evil exists. Is all this just our projections? No, it's not about denying the existence of evil or real threats. It's about how we react to them and how our own unconscious content exacerbates the situation. When we see only pure evil in another, we lose the ability to discern, to understand causes, to seek true solutions. We become blind to our own shadow aspects, which, like a boomerang, return to us in the form of wars, hatred, and destruction. Understanding the collective shadow is not an excuse for cruelty, but a key to preventing it. It is the realization that every time we dehumanize the other, we dehumanize a part of ourselves and thereby lose the opportunity to integrate this aspect into a holistic worldview. But if the shadow is what we repress and hate, what happens to those qualities we admire in others but do not allow ourselves to possess? For not only rejected aspects shape our collective reality, but also those we elevate to a pedestal, giving them a part of our own unrealized power. We have already delved into the abyss, into that dark, rejected part of the collective unconscious where society exiles its inconvenient qualities. We spoke of the pole of irritation, of the scandalous mirror of the other, of how the energy of the unpaid bill breaks through as xenophobia and genocide when everything unbearable to see in oneself is projected onto a scapegoat. But the human psyche, this infinite cosmos, not only repels and banishes, it is also capable of the exact opposite movement, of projecting admiration, of erecting pedestals, of granting to another what we do not dare to acknowledge as our own. This is a phenomenon that can be called the golden shadow. If the ordinary shadow represents everything we reject within ourselves, the golden shadow embodies all that is magnificent, radiant, and powerful, that we don't acknowledge as our own, but admire enthusiastically in others. These are our unrealized talents, our genuine strength, our potential for greatness, our capacity for deep empathy, boundless creativity, and wisdom. Instead of integrating these qualities, we project them onto external objects, onto idols, gurus, charismatic leaders, idealized nations, or cultures. Imagine a vein of gold hidden deep within your soul. Instead of extracting this gold and forging something of your own, you generously shower another person with it, transforming them into a shining deity, an unattainable star. You look at them and your heart fills with awe, while your soul is overwhelmed by a sense of inadequacy. There he is, a true genius. There she is, true beauty. There they are, unwavering heroes, you whisper, unaware that the lion's share of this light is your own unrevealed radiance. On an individual level, this projection sabotages our development and paralyzes our will to act. Why should I develop my voice when there's a singer whose voice is perfect? Why should I strive for leadership when someone else is born to lead? We become perpetual spectators rather than participants in our own lives, surrendering our power to the seemingly unattainable glory of others. We forgo the opportunity to become whole because our ideal already embodies everything we believe we can never attain. On a collective level, the golden shadow becomes a dangerous tool when entire nations or groups project their best qualities, their strength, their righteousness, their historical mission onto a single leader, an ideology, or a myth of their own exceptionalism. They deprive themselves of critical thinking and the capacity for self-reflection. Slogans like, "Our leader is infallible," "Our nation is chosen," "Our culture surpasses all others," filled with the golden glow of projection, blind us to darker aspects, to the potential for destruction, to mistakes and injustice. A society blinded by its own projected gold onto external symbols becomes vulnerable to manipulation. It can easily succumb to calls for purging, expulsion from the tribe, or the dehumanization of the other, because we are light and they are darkness, and there's no need to seek the shadow in one's own heart if it's so conveniently placed outside. Recall who your idol or object of admiration is in the realm of collective interaction. Perhaps it's a politician who seems to embody justice, or a public figure whose charisma enthralls you, or maybe it's an entire nation, culture, or way of life that you idealize. Consider what talents, unrealized abilities, or aspects of your inner strength you might have given away to this ideal. Which traits you so value in them could be your own, if only you dared to acknowledge them. Integrating the golden shadow isn't about tearing down idols. It's about reclaiming your own radiance. It's the realization that what you admire externally is merely a reflection of your own dormant potential. This doesn't mean we should stop appreciating the achievements of others, but it is a call to begin valuing and developing our own. The path to wholeness, to a true understanding of collective dynamics, lies not only through courageously confronting the horrors of our dark shadow, but also through an equally brave reclamation of the dazzling light of our golden shadow. For only when we gather all the scattered fragments of ourselves will we attain genuine power and begin to create a world free from blind projections and destructive conflicts. But how do we reclaim what seems irrevocably given away? And how do we distinguish true admiration from dangerous projection? We have journeyed through the labyrinths of the collective unconscious, touched the burning wounds of the shadow, and felt the dazzling light of the golden shadow. We've seen how the pole of irritation pushes out what seems alien, how the energy of the unpaid bill seeks release, giving rise to the architect of purity and the mirror destroyer. Yet knowledge, however profound, is only the first step. True transformation begins where theory meets action, where understanding becomes practice. It's time to stop being passive observers, prisoners of collective projections. It's time to reclaim our power. This means not just accepting the shadow, but integrating it, redirecting its energy. This is not a call for permissiveness or an excuse for evil. It's a manifesto of wholeness. A philosophy was asserting that true power lies not in severance, but in the appropriation of all aspects of one's being, both dark and light. It's an alchemy of the soul, capable of transforming the poison of repression into the elixir of awareness, and another's radiance into one's own. I propose a simple yet powerful exercise, the mirror of return. This is a tool for personal work, which, if practiced by many, can initiate healing on a collective level, stripping the collective shadow of its power. Step 1. Working with the dark shadow. Recall a recent instance where you experienced strong aversion, disgust, anger, or fear towards a person, group, event, or even a character trait displayed by someone. This could be anything: a politician, a news story, a neighbor's behavior, a trait you condemn in another. Ask yourself, what quality in this person, event, group evokes such strong repulsion in me? What exactly do I hate, despise, or fear in them? Now take a deep breath and ask yourself, where, in what form does this very same quality manifest, or could it manifest in me? Where have I myself acted from a similar impulse, even if in a different, milder form? Or where was I taught that this quality is absolutely unacceptable? Perhaps it's unprovoked aggression, selfishness, weakness of will, chaos, vulnerability. Now, the most crucial part: what potential strength or constructive intention is hidden behind this quality if it were consciously transformed and directed? 4. Example: unprovoked aggression might be a distorted will to act, healthy assertiveness, or the ability to protect one's boundaries. Selfishness could be the necessary self-care and priority setting. Weakness of will, deep empathy, and a reluctance to cause harm. Chaos, creativity, and adaptability. Allow yourself to see this potential. Step 2. Working with the golden shadow. Now think of a person, real or fictional, whom you admire immensely, whose qualities seem unattainable, even divine. This could be a leader, an artist, a scientist, a spiritual mentor, or even a book character. Ask yourself, what qualities do I admire most in this person? What about them seems so incredible and beautiful to me? Perhaps it's charisma, intellect, kindness, creative genius, or an unyielding will. Now take another deep breath and ask, where do I possess these qualities myself but fail to acknowledge them? Where do I diminish my talents, fear to express my potential, believing myself unworthy or not good enough? And finally, what small step can I take today to begin manifesting this quality in my life, to claim it as my own, to recognize it as part of my radiance? Perhaps it will be public speaking, writing a single line, offering a sincere compliment, or a small act of compassion. By practicing the mirror of return, we not only heal our personal wounds, but also begin to dissolve the collective illusion of the other. As each individual reclaims their projections, the pole of irritation loses its fuel, and the energy of the unpaid bill transforms into creative energy. We cease to need scapegoats, architects of purity who eliminate differences, and mirror destroyers who dehumanize those unlike us. We become architects of our own wholeness and consequently architects of a new society, a society capable of seeing not only darkness but also light in all its manifestations, both within and without. This is the path to genuine freedom and self-determination. We have explored the depths of the shadow, its dark manifestations, and its golden facets. We have touched upon how it shapes our reality individually and collectively. But what happens when we truly begin to integrate these aspects, when we stop being held hostage by old narratives and start creating new ones, when we not only see the world differently, but also build it anew? There is something that lies beyond the shadow, something that is its natural continuation and resolution. It is not merely the absence of conflict, but the active creation of harmony, where every voice matters and every uniqueness enriches the whole. This is the other side of the coin, and it demands an entirely different perspective.